Well, folks, welcome to the Hump Day Hangar presentations sponsored by supercub.org and the Straight and Level podcast. As usual, I want to thank all of our supporting members of supercub.org and our advertisers for making these presentations possible. Of course, huge thanks to the presenters and to all of you in the audience. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to watch these. And share these links with your friends. Share that YouTube link with your friends. Some of them may not be able to make it to the live show. A lot of people have to work and other things like that. So feel free to send those things around. The more the merrier. We'll try to keep doing these things. So next week, Ted Waltman is speaking of keeping doing. Ted Waltman is back next week. You may remember his program on routes to Alaska. And next week, he's doing another great photo and information presentation about flying in Alaska, focused around the Wrangell St. Elias National Park and Preserve, specifically in the McCarthy area. So not the McCarthy era, that's something else, in the McCarthy area. So be sure to tune in for that one. That's going to be another great presentation. And so we're always looking for folks to do these presentations. We actually have some pretty neat ones lined up for the fall, but some of those folks weren't able to do them soon. So in the next few weeks, we're still looking for some people that might want to jump in and do one of these presentations. So if you know somebody, send me an email at steve@supercub.org and suggest somebody who might be good for one of these presentations. So at the end of today's presentation, we're gonna have a Q&A thing just like we normally do. Feel free to use the chat box. Steve is actually going to be monitoring the chat box today because I'm running his slides. So feel free to use the chat box if you have questions about the things that are happening. You can use the chat on YouTube as well. I'll be monitoring that. So to ask questions, and that way we can keep the conversation rolling. So we kind of want this to be a little more interactive maybe than usual. So I want to take a minute. I'm going to share my screen here, and I want to take a minute and talk a little bit about, let's see, here we go. I suspect you can see that now. Talk a little bit about this hat that I'm wearing and this hat that Steve Pierce is wearing and the Flip Flop Flyers Club. So in around 2009, evidenced by what you'll see of some of the pictures that Steve is going to show you tonight, people were getting in trouble with airplanes, and we had a member on the website that had a running log of NTSB reports, and the member's name was Flip Flop, and he would post the NTSB reports for anything that happened in a Super Cub. So about 10 or 11 years ago, I had my nephew do this design, and we came up with a hat to send to folks that have been in some kind of trouble in an airplane. Now, some people have a lot of these hats, and at one point I was thinking about developing a helmet or something like that we could give to people that had a number of them. But the idea is that when you got one of these hats, maybe you would take the time to talk about what happened to you. People would ask you about the hat. Maybe it would take time to talk with somebody about what happened to you, and maybe save somebody else from making the same mistake. That was the whole goal, and it's worked pretty well. Most of the people wear them. Occasionally, I do get some. We just send the hats out unannounced, no explanation. They just kind of show up in the mail. So we're still doing that. To this date, I have sent out over 250 of those since 2009, and that's just the ones that I know about. So it's been a fairly popular little thing. Let's see here. So I'm privileged to count tonight's presenter among one of my very best friends. Steve hardly needs an introduction to this group. He is certainly one of the top experts in both long and short wing fabric airplanes, fabric pipers in the country. His passion for rebuilding and maintaining fabric aircraft equals his passion for flying, something he does nearly every day. Steve and Kathy are my partners in the shortwingpipers.org forum, and Steve has been a supercub.org member since the very early days. He's helped more members get back in the air and stay in the air safely than anyone else on the site. He's also contributed significantly to the technical focus of both supercub.org and shortwingpipers.org. So tonight we're going to get to hear about the many lessons Steve has learned and watched others learn the very expensive way. welcome Steve Pierce.
Thanks. Well,
whoops, right onto your first slide, sorry.
Oh, so the motivation behind this is kind of like Steve said with the hats. You know, a lot of this stuff doesn't get talked about. You can watch YouTube and you see all kinds of cool videos of people landing in off airport places and all that, fun stuff and all the glory and all that stuff. But the harsh reality of it is that there's severe consequences. And fortunately or unfortunately, I've had some of those consequences, and my mom says I've run out of most of my lives. I've done a lot of stupid stuff, and luckily I've lived to tell about it, and I've learned from it. And so that's the point in this. There's some funny stories in this presentation, but there's also some serious stories. And so, I don't want to make light of it. I hope your takeaway is I don't have to do that because I saw what he did or she did or whoever did. So anyway, to start with, we have some of our accidents, incidents, whatever you want to call them, are caused by, maintenance items or failures of parts or whatever. And that's part of the reason for supercub.org, in my opinion, is to share that knowledge of what are the problem areas of these airplanes so that, people know what to look for, what to look at, what breaks, what fails, what messes up, what causes problems. And so some of these first slides are covering some of this. And this particular one was a cabane fitting failure on the left gear. And so you can change that, Steve. So it was a nice, perfect touchdown on a grass runway, and the cabane fitting broke and had safety cables and slid down the runway, and this is how it ended. And ended up being picked up, put on a trailer, and brought here. And we fixed the airplane, and there's some good pictures of my family. Kathy helped. This is Bill Tracy's airplane. He'll admit to it. And we've got pictures of Lee helping him rebuild this boot cowl, and Kathy helped him blow all the finish off. And we were just going to redope it, but we found some rust and stuff, so it got rebuilt. But we put heavy duty cabane fittings on from airframes, and Bill's flown probably a couple thousand hours since this incident. So anyhow, okay. So the next one should be, these are some of the parts. This is how, it wadded up. It broke this is the hydrosorb where the bungees were. It broke the hydrosorb off, and you can see the safety cables there. And the next picture, I think, is the same thing, just a different angle of it. And keep going. The next, so go on past the bungees, and then this is the cabane fitting, and this was the failure point, and this is another cabane. Go back to the first one, Steve. Go back one. So this is the failure point. That cabane fitting broke, and that's what was the chain of events. And Airframes makes a fitting that it's double the thickness here, but it's a good area to look at. And in the next picture, go to the next one of the yellow cabane fitting. So this one was on my brother's J3, and we just happened to see it. Tom found it. They were working on the exhaust, and Tom came and got me out of the shop, and he said, "You better come look at this." And he'd been flying the airplane. This rolled into the hangar this way, and it was about to fail.
Hey, sorry to interrupt you, Steve. I got a note from somebody here said that there's no picture except for Steve for you folks on Zoom. Is that true? Is everybody else seeing the picture? Seeing the pictures? Wave your hands if you're seeing Steve's pictures. You do? Okay. Doug, I think it's on your end. Sorry, Steve.
Okay, so to the next picture. So this was an engine failure. So I'm on my way home from dropping Tal Erickson off at the airport at DFW, and my brother's out flying his 90-horse Super Cub, and I get a phone call. He's got his wireless headsets Bluetooth to his phone, and he calls me and he says, "I just lost oil pressure." And I'm like, "Well, get on the ground." And he goes, "Well, I'm over, all this mesquite, and there's nowhere to land, and it's running fine, and I'm almost to the airport." And, this conversation goes on and goes on. And then he says, "I just got oil all over the windshield. The prop just stopped, and I'm going down." And so then, all I hear is, I'm driving, and all I hear is just crashing, and I'm screaming into the phone, "Chris, Chris, Chris," and I can hear him talking, and I'm freaking out. I'm driving down the highway. I'm an hour from home, and this happened, and I'm screaming at him, and finally what it did is it knocked his headset off. He put it in this short field and ended up, before going into the trees, flipped it over, and anyway, scared me to death. The carburetor caught on fire afterwards, but he lost oil pressure and ended up throwing a rod, and it threw it up through the top of the crankcase, and ended up in this field, or part of it. It wasn't a very big field. He did a pretty good job of putting it in there. He was real good with this airplane. It made us sick because had lots of fun with it, but and it's partially rebuilt now. It needs some more work. We got the fuselage fixed and covered, and the wings are fixed and covered, but you can see where he came in. He slipped down over those trees, and this is a 90-horse Cub, and got it stopped before he went into those big trees. But we never did figure out what caused the oil pressure to fail. But you could see that it had no oil pressure, and the bearings were seized up, and the rod came up through the top. But I tell you what, I'll never want to relive that minute, because I didn't know, what happened. All I could hear was crashing. And so anyway, it's one of those few things, I haven't seen many complete engine failures, but this is one of those that I wouldn't want to see again. This next video Tom sent to me today, I had forgotten about this. We have a certain area at our airport that, go back to that video, Steve.
I know, I didn't know I didn't play.
So this is right across from my hangar, and we've actually had 8 ground loops here. I've got an FX3 Carbon Cub in my hangar right now that ground looped right there. The wind does some weird stuff when it's from the northwest. This was actually a mechanical failure. We got the airplane in. This is a supercub.org member that was ferrying this airplane, and luckily it didn't damage anything, but we found the tail wheel was just a mess, and was real hard to control and hard to steer. And so that's why that's in there, is another part of my mechanical failure. I tear apart a lot of tail wheels, and I find lots of problems, and have actually picked up quite a few Super Cubs that were wrecked, in my opinion, from faulty tail wheels or sprung tail springs where you couldn't steer the aircraft because the tail spring was so flat, a shimmy or wouldn't turn or whatever. Okay, so the next series of slides, you can just kind of go through these. This was a tornado that went through Breckenridge, Texas, and this is where I got started. I spent 5 years working at a warbird shop. This is Ezel Aviation here, and the tornado ripped out the back wall and finally blew out a roll-up door to relieve the pressure. Red Bull's P-38 was in there, a Corsair was in there. It annihilated. It really just tore the heck out of this airport, and just some of the force of nature, and you just never know. We actually own this Tri-Pacer. I picked this Tri-Pacer up for the insurance company. They paid me to pick the building up off of it and get it out of there, and then they auctioned it off, and we bought it. And this engine is on my wife's Tri-Pacer, Kathy's Tri-Pacer has this engine. And then my kids started rebuilding it, and they got in high school and other stuff. And it's another project that I have around here. So anyway, but there's a couple more pictures there of the Breckenridge Airport and the Mother Nature's wrath. Then we get into the tornado at Sun and Fun, and Sal and I were there. We flew my Pacer, and this is an air coupe that was flipped over. And go ahead. It was just, you had a lot of airplanes that were fine, and then there would be an airplane that was torn up, and it was very depressing because we came in the next morning to help Mark Erickson pick up. He had one of Dakota Cub's airplanes was flipped over, and they had gone in there that night and picked up all these wrecks and put them in a pile with a forklift. And it was a depressing sight, but you can go ahead. This is the Husky that it was in Aviat's display. There were a lot of pictures of that. And I was just going through trying to get to my airplane to make sure that there was nothing wrong with it. And luckily my airplane was all right, and my dad's airplane was all right. My airplane, they put me back in the swamp because I had big tires. And the only thing it did, you can see my tail wheels kind of cocked. It just cocked my airplane over, but I think the trees kind of helped. And the next couple of pictures you get into are what we had to deal with Dakota Cub. And this is the prototype for the type certificate for the Super 18. So this airplane's kind of dear to Mark's heart because this was his prototype and went through the type certificate testing and all that. And the 90 horse on the left there, I think it just scratched the cowling on it. But an interesting story, when we went to flip this airplane over, there was a jet parked next to him, a display, and the owner of that airplane was upset with me because he said that when I tried to flip Mark's airplane over, it was going to land on his jet. And I said, well, it's not going to land on your jet. I've done this a couple times before, but if you don't want it to land, if you're afraid it's going to land on your jet, you can move it. But we got it all flipped over, and I never get a picture of the airplane straight up in the air as we flip them over because there's just too many people tied up, nobody with a camera ready. But anyway, it did a lot of damage, and this airplane is rebuilt now and back to flying. And this is the claw, and a lot of people fault the claw for a lot of the damage, but you can break an anvil, and I mean, between the claw and several other, I think they all work pretty good. You can't design something that is light and usable, and I mean, something's going to break. So
at some point, something's going to break. Right.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't break the tie down, you break the wing. So, and this broke the rope. So anyway, that was some of the wrath of Mother Nature. So the next series of pictures, so I fly on the river, the Brazos River, and that's my playground. And my friends around here, we meet up on Sunday mornings and we fly the river and land on gravel bars, and that's what we do for fun. And we're kind of hard on wingtips, and this is my wingtip, and this is the branch. You can see this branch that I got with my wingtip when I came in, and the next shot you can actually see that I found my nav light lens in the brush, unbroken, and was able to put it back together. But I've knocked both wingtips, both nav lights off a couple times. Now this is Tom Ford loves to play this video when there's a group of people. This was back in 2015, and he and I landed in this little spot. And Steve Johnson told me years ago that every pilot has at least 3 good excuses. So my excuse for me catching my left wingtip on this tree is that I'm blind in my left eye. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But Tom loves to play the sound of this.
Did you hear the
So
sound?
he's probably laughing. He's probably laughing right now. But so the next couple of pictures are the aftermath. There's the tree. And then the next shot that's what it did to my aileron and my wing. luckily my daughter does good fabric patches and she patched it up for me. That's where we ended up landing. But anyway, and that's another one where I knocked the lens out and actually found it. This was a day before I got suckered into the right side of this strip and wasn't paying attention, got a little bit too close to the trees, and it started pulling the airplane towards the right. And luckily I felt it and got it back to the left. But I've seen people get sucked into. I had one guy fixed a Cub one time, and he goes, "Yeah, I kind of brushed this tree, and I thought it'd just go right through it." He said that thing stuck like Velcro. It ended up going on its nose and ripping the wing off, tore it up pretty bad. So I was lucky here because this was the day before I was going to Utah. This is what I got up against. I was trying to stay out of that brush that's over there on the right side of the screen and got a little bit too far to the right and got my wingtip in the brush. So I guess, you got to assess your landing zone and then figure out, okay, where am I going to land? Is that wide enough for my airplane? Am I going to, can I get around that brush? Can I get around that hole or that mound or whatever? I started doing this stuff about 20 years ago with a clipper, and I've learned lots of lessons. Some of them the hard way. I've spent a lot of time without an airplane because of my antics on the river, and so some of these pictures are some of my stupidity. So the next, let's see, that's the lens. Okay, go to this next one. This was an interesting. Everybody knows Steve Eaton. He's quite the character. And this is in northern Oklahoma, almost to the Kansas border. And we left Graham, Texas at dark 30, and we drove 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 some more. And I was about aggravated and tired and ready to be there. And we got up on this plateau and looked down over this area. I was looking for a wagon train. There's no power lines. There's no pump jacks. It is exquisite, beautiful. The problem is we had to get down there with a truck and trailer. That arrow is pointing to an upside down Super Cub. So in the next couple of pictures, you can see the prairie that we had to drive across and cross a creek. This is a creek that we had to cross to get to it. And luckily we had a good group to help with this project. But in the next picture, we start to see the airplane, and that's Steve up there in the red pickup, and the insurance adjuster's in the white pickup. And what was interesting is he got a gust of wind off that hill and it flipped him over, and it didn't even damage the spinner. And the nose bowl was okay. I told the insurance adjuster that I wasn't responsible for any of the damage to flipping it over. We were able to flip it. We took the cowling and the nose bowl and everything off and the spinner, and we're able to flip it without damaging any of the front end. But it took quite a bit of work to get the airplane fixed after that. But these pictures, every time he gets out of hand, I'll post these pictures to kind of deflate his ego a little bit. So it usually works. And this next picture is him calling Charlie aileron because the insurance adjuster told him what he had in insurance money, and I told him I couldn't repair it for what he had, for what it was going to cost. So he's desperate right now. He's calling Charlie, wanting to know if Charlie can fix this airplane for the budget that the insurance is going to pay. So, and then the next picture is the recovery crew, and it was funny because this VW on the left, he was down picking up a fuselage in Florida and come through my place, and then that's Brian Moore, who worked for me, and then me, and then Bob Nall from up the Northwest, and then Steve Eaton there. That's all loaded up. That's a special trailer that Scott Warren had built years ago when he was in the Cub business, and he sold me. But that trailer holds a Super Cub perfectly, and it tilts so you can winch it up on there. So it makes recovery pretty well, as easy as it can be. It's easy to haul. My in-laws have hauled Super Cubs all over the country on that trailer. And so it comes in handy. This next set of pictures is the first Super Cub that I rebuilt completely. This was in Louisiana. The guy was on a little crop duster strip, was real narrow, and it had clump grass on either side. and he just got off of it just a little bit, and it just drug him in and ripped the wing completely out of the fuselage and torqued it pretty good. But my mom and dad flew in there and helped take it apart. Cy worked for me. He and I flew in and helped, and then my in-laws drove in. They have a cabin close to where this was, and they trailered it back here for us. And this was my first total rebuild. And it was a 1982 model airplane, a 1982 Super Cub. You can see the metal ailerons and flaps, but it ripped that wing. It did a pretty good number on it. And then the reason for the X brace, that's got that does not have an X brace, and it caved the structure of the fuselage into the cabin just a little bit, not too bad. But the X brace is that'll let the wing tear up and keep the fuselage intact and protect the occupant. This next picture is right off the end of our runway here. Loss of control on a J3. You wouldn't believe the ravine. This was probably 100 feet down a ravine and into the trees. It didn't hurt. The only thing it hurt on the airplane was the prop and the left landing gear. And the next picture is, so there's the airplane, and it's up against a rock. The left landing gear is up against a rock, and it protected the wings from going into the trees. And then the next picture, Lee's got a prize. It's hard to believe now. Lee's almost 17 years old, and it's hard to think back that far, but he's got a prize with what's left of the propeller. But when I first saw the airplane, it was we drug it out of there, and like I said, the only thing wrong was that left landing gear and the propeller. So, this was my this was my first accident that I couldn't fly out of. In my previous clipper that I was in the midair in, I got stuck on a gravel bar one time. I tried to turn, and you don't pivot turn on a sandbar because you dig a tire in and then you can't get it out. It digs in, and what I figured out is if you pile sand around the tire and then go pick up on the strut and pick the airplane up, the sand will fall in the hole, and you can do that several times, and that's how I got myself out on the little, when I got stuck years ago in my first clipper. Now this is my clipper that I bought after the midair, and people come out they want to land on the river and do stuff, and they come out on little tires, and I said, you really need bush wheels because you never know. In this particular incident, I'd landed on this gravel bar before, and I did not see a little dune. There was a little hump, and I hit it with my left gear. Now I was rolling out, the left wing started dipping a little bit, and it collapsed the gear. In the next picture, you can see what the result was. The gear failed, and the clipper gear is not near as stout as a Super Cub gear, and then it sent the wheel and the tire up into the strut. So we had to go out there with a prop and a gear and strut so that I could fly it out, and then it was a tear down, and that, anyway, it was lesson learned. You need the proper equipment to do the job, and a PH-16 on 700 by 6 tires was not the proper equipment.
It sounds like it'd be handy. It sounds like it'd be handy if you knew a guy with a helicopter.
Yeah, that would be pretty handy. Probably expensive, but handy. But this is okay. So the insurance adjuster called me and sent me these pictures and wanted me to come get this up off the Red River. And he said, "Yeah, the brakes locked up." And I said, "Yeah, it's amazing to me. Every airplane that I see that the brakes locked up, it's usually right before they go in the river. It's just magic." But anyway, this was one that had to be taken apart and hauled out off the Red River several years ago. He got a lot of press coverage on the nightly news and all that. That was one of the bad ones because, when everybody finds out about it, they like to report on airplane accidents or incidents. So the next one is one of my, I don't know, kind of a dum-dum. Bill Tracy had been down here for a couple of weeks, and we'd go out in the mornings and play and fly and have a good time, and we were getting pretty good at it. And then we'd work when it get hot, we go work. Well, I landed on old water skied up on this little spot, my pacer, and I turned around, and my normal procedure was to leave the flaps up, get going, get to the end of the gravel bar, pull the flaps, get that extra little bit of lift, and I'd be flying. Well, this day, it didn't work out so well. I poured the coals to it and got to the end of the gravel bar. I lifted off, and she settled, and I skipped 3 times, and this is how I ended up. And, you know, I'm in the cockpit, I'm buckled in, and you can see I've got the back door open. Well, I've always heard you don't freak out and unbuckle, because then you fall on your head and you bust your head open. Well, I had the presence of mind to remember that, because I've been taught that lesson by several good friends. So in the next picture, you can see me, I wedged my body, my legs and my arms. You can see Bill over here ready to come. He's taking the picture, but so I wedged my body, unbuckled, and then climbed I actually went over the top of the fuselage so I wouldn't damage the wing, and got out. And the bad thing was, so I called Kathy. Well, that didn't go very well. She wasn't too happy with me. And so she got the girls and some of the girls' friends and Lee and the dogs, and Bill had to go land in a field adjacent to this and bring all these people in one at a time. And you can see these ropes. So Bill got across the river with a come along, and we ended up we had, I don't know, 5 or 6 kids, Bill and I and Kathy, and we flipped it over in the river, took the cowling off, had a big block of wood to keep the engine out of the water. The engine didn't get in the water. We flipped it over, drained out the gas, put fresh gas in it, and I taxied down. The water was real low, so I was able to taxi to a longer gravel bar and take off and fly it home. But it tweaked, the wingtips had little wing dings in them, and of course the prop was abraded pretty good, and it shook a little bit on the flight out, but it, you know, I was pretty mad at myself, and I had to call Steve and tell him what I did. And that was, you know, one of those humbling things. So I think that was my first Flip-Flop Flyers hat, if I remember correctly. Because I think those other incidents were prior to the Flip-Flop Flyers Club.
Yeah, I use Pierce's office as a second warehouse for these hats now, in case I need any extras to send out.
need kill pins on them. But so anyway, now this is an interesting video. So this is an airplane that I maintain, and I got this video from the owner. And it's immediately when I saw it, I knew what was fixing to happen, because when I fly low, I always look for telephone poles because I don't see the lines. Well, you can see a telephone pole there. So I'll let you watch this, and then I'll show you the aftermath.
Got it? There it is.
And if you watched, you saw him duck. He was very lucky, because the prop missed that line. And in the next series of photos, you can see what it did. It scratched the windshield, and we were able to buff that out. And when it broke, it caught the landing gear. It just scuffed the landing gear. It's got kind of a burn mark right there. We patched that, and then it caught, the next photo is the lift strut. It scraped the lift strut a little bit, and then it scraped the leading edge. He was very lucky, because it broke it, and it kept on going, and, you know, a little bit of cleanup, and it was good. that's the scuff in the windshield. I wasn't as lucky in a similar situation. The next picture. So 2 weeks after I flipped my airplane, you got to realize I'm a slow learner. So I took the engine off. I had the prop strike on that other engine. I took that engine off. I put another engine that I had that was about a mid-time engine on my Pacer. And I went out early in the morning and I was just flying down the river and I saw this spot that I thought, I bet I can land there. And I looked around and I go, wait a minute, that power line's here. And then I looked over at the field and I go, no, I just passed it. That was the next field back. Big mistake, stupid mistake. Should have flown around, verified where I was, verified where the power line was. So the next thing I know, I see the power line. I shove the yoke forward, I shove the power in, and wham. I mean, I didn't have any time to do anything, but I just went careening through the trees. And this picture, well, go back one, Steve.
Okay, hang on.
Well, okay, you went forward one. So this is the leading edge. So this is the airplane through the trees. You can see how the nose is cocked over and everything. So you see the power line coming up, and that's what wadded up. The power line broke. It wadded up the aileron and keep going. And then you can see it go across to the flap on the other wing. And the aileron, go to the next picture. That's it. That's through the leading edge. So go to the next picture. It went through the leading edge. It hit the lift strut. So you can see the chatter marks where it hit the lift strut, got hung up in the tie down fitting, cut through the leading edge, went over the top of the wing, got hung up in the aileron, wadded the aileron up. The other end ended up in the left flap and tore the left flap up. And you go to the next picture, and it was a bad deal. I mean, I hit my face. I didn't have shoulder harnesses, which was stupid because I should have learned that lesson the first time. So I cut my face, cut my chin, broke my wrist. I knew where I was on the river, but I didn't know where I was to get to help. There's the cable wrapped around the aileron. You can see the condition of the aileron. So I went hiking. I'd left my spot on my toolbox. I had my cell phone. I called Kathy, told her what I'd done, didn't know where I was. I took a picture of a lease, an oil lease, so that if she didn't hear from me, she would at least know where to find my body. And so I just kept walking. I was walking up a 2-track lease road, and I got to a dirt road, and it's eeny, meeny, miny, mo, go right or go left. Well, I saw a sign that said, slow down for dogs. I thought, well, somebody's got to live there. So I walked to the house. Lady answered the door. She said, I'd let you in to wash up, but my power's out. And it didn't dawn on me why her power was out. So she told me where how to get to where she was. So I called Kathy, and she came and picked me up, and she had Lee with her, and Lee kind of freaked out. He was little at the time, but went to the emergency room and fractured my jaw in 3 places, and they had to stitch it all up. And I was very lucky. And then we had to recover this, and a bunch of the Oklahoma boys came down and helped. Kathy and I went out every morning and would disassemble parts of it. And then Saturday, all the Okie boys came down, and we got a little track hoe in there, and they helped us get it out. And it was stupid on my part, but I learned a valuable lesson, and I went without an airplane for quite a long time after that because of it. But anyway, some of the seriousness of all of it, know your surroundings, know where you're, look, because I know a lot of people have hit power lines and lived to tell about it. I know a couple people that haven't lived to tell about it. So I was very lucky, and anyway, so this next one was an interesting. So he had been flying a 180, got back in his Cub, heat of the summer, going into a buddy's field, and rising terrain, a little bit fast, not enough oomph to get over the rising terrain, and touched down on the field and ended up in the trees. Didn't hurt him, but ended up ended up in a total rebuild, but and the airplane's better for it. But luckily, it didn't hurt him, and we were able to rebuild the airplane, fix the fuselage, rebuild the wings. But you can see it just ripped the wing clean out of the fuselage, and it's just being held by a cable and the control cable, balance cable, a couple of fuel lines. But
Steve, I got a question real quick here, because one of the things that this particular picture does is it exposes one of the things that I don't like about the old Super Cubs, which is having all that wiring right there by the fuel tank. And I know, like, mine has been, was built later, modified, so there's some little avionics wires up there and that kind of thing, but there's none of that. No, I mean, that's the whole master panel, the master switch, and everything that's exposed right there on that old plane. Yeah. Have you seen where that's caused problems before, where being that proximity to the fuel has caused other problems?
Well, we think that's probably what caused the fire in Paul Fisher's accident. I mean, that's just speculation, but you've got, the propensity to fuel, you've got, 2 fuel lines in the gauge, and then you've got, however many amps of electricity right straight to there from the battery. And in all the rebuilds but the first one that I did, I've put the electric in the panel, and there's more room. I mean, I don't know, it makes sense to me to do it that way and keep that away from the fuel as best as possible. And Cub Crafters does that as well in their rebuilds and in their Newport 23 airplanes, as does Dakota Cub. So that's a good point. And this airplane, when we rebuilt it, this was getting it out with a backhoe. But and that's a funny story about this. I had measured this airplane for the thrust line modification, and this was always a fast airplane, which we know the fast airplanes don't have all the right incidents on them. So it was not a candidate for the thrust line. And so I told him when I rebuilt it, I said, look, it's going to go on my jig, and it's going to have the right angle of incidence on the wing, and so it's going to slow down. And so that's a running joke with him. He'll razz me every now and then about how I slowed his airplane down. And my comeback is always, but it lands a lot better slow now, doesn't it? He always agrees. It's a really nice airplane. It's a really nice flying airplane. So, and I through that rebuild, we got to be really good friends. I mean, it was straight shooting, just no BS. Now, another lesson learned. So this is a propeller. This is a bore propeller, and we have some mud, but then we have a lot of gravel on the Brazos River. So one of the people that I fly with was on 35-inch bush wheels, and he rolled up through the mud and under the gravel. So he had this coating of mud all over his tires, and then it picked up all these rocks. And he stopped and got out, and he started scraping it off, and that was a little bit too much work. And he said, well, I'll just take off, and it'll all sling off. Well, you think, okay, it'll sling off backwards. Well, no, it's going to sling off all the way around. And you look at these series of pictures, and this prop was hammered. I mean, it shook pretty good on the way back. And I measured it, and I measured it out that it could be repaired, and the prop shop said it couldn't. So he ended up buying a new prop. And I asked him to fix this one where it could just be a ferry prop if I had to get somebody out of the river. Well, it came back with a yellow tag. And this is, and I measured it and measured good. This is a prop that's on my airplane right now. When I finally got a Super Cub, I had this prop rat holed away, and I loaned it to Tom, and Tom had it on his airplane. And anyway, when I got mine, we had the musical props, but it chewed it up pretty good. That gash right there is 1/2 an inch wide, and that next one's pretty deep. But those rocks do hell, and my prop is in bad shape because of rocks. Those tires throw those rocks up and sling them right into that area of the prop. And that's why I'm hoping Cato will get their prop STC, because that nickel leading edge has a Rockwell hardness of about 80, and the Rockwell hardness of this aluminum prop is about 8. And the people that I fly with that have Cato props have no dents or dings. And my prop, I'm constantly dressing it. I took it to the prop shop one time to get it repitched, And I told him not to laugh. He laughed at me at how eroded it was, but he pitched it for me. So anyway,
you're getting hydraulic damage too for being in the water. Some, I assume, as well.
Well, I don't really water ski that much. A little bit I'll water ski up on one, but yeah, probably a little bit, because I know the seaplane that I maintain, it gets pretty good erosion. It just doesn't get the chips. You know, it'll erode, but it doesn't get the chips. The chips are really, you know, you got to file them and smooth them out, and that takes a lot of meat away. So
well, I noticed the difference with the MT prop and the on the seaplane when I had on floats. The difference, the water erosion was 100% different. The MT didn't bother it at all, but the old Hartzell was just getting chewed up from any time the water spray was on there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, this was me again. My brother was out in his J3 and I was in his Super Cub, and we were out tooling around, and this is during a drought, and we landed in the lake. Everybody say hi to Alley Cat. She just jumped in my lap. So we're out scouting the river and the lake, and we landed at Possum Kingdom, and I told him, I said, I want to land in that area over there and get a picture from up on the bluff. And he came in and landed in his J3 and started moving brush and stuff out of the way. So I came in the Super Cub, had Lee in the back seat. We touched down, and I'm rolling out, and I just eased on the brakes, and bloop, just sunk. And it was just a crust, and I broke through that crust when I applied the brakes, and it just sunk. And I was mad at myself, and I was not saying any nice words, and kind of freaked Lee out, and I kind of caught myself, and I told Lee, I said, look, we're fine. I'm just mad at myself. And we got out, pulled the tail down, and so we had to figure out how to get out of there. So my brother, this is Lee, and you got to listen to this. So my brother takes off we call Kathy and tell her what we've done, and she's coming to get us, but my brother's got to go find out how to get her to where we are. So you got to listen to this is Lee. This is funny.
This is the first time I've been in a situation like this, Dad. This is like my first wreck.
So we had to have a long talk.
You know whose kid he is when he says it's my first wreck, because you know there's going to be more.
Well, there were two things that we had to have a talk about right then. Number one, this wasn't a wreck. This was just an incident, because we could see him going to school and telling all his friends that he was in an airplane wreck. But then the other thing was that this is not normal behavior, and your dad's an idiot. So it's part of the problem with being raised by me, I guess. But the problem was, I got back to the hangar. This was on a Sunday. I get back to the hangar on Sunday night. Well, the Brazos River Authority calls, and they're ticked off. I'm already ticked off at myself. So they're telling me that I can't fly the airplane out. I can't get any mechanized equipment in there, and that I've got to get the airplane out of there. And I got mad, and I said, well, I'll just throw a match on it, piss on it. And they got mad, and I caught myself, and I apologized, and I said, look, I'm mad at myself, and now you're telling me I can't use anything to get it out. I said, that leaves me one choice, is a helicopter, which is a lot of money. And I said, the airplane is perfectly safe to fly out of there. It's built for that kind of thing. And he calmed down, and he said, well, he'd talked to his boss and yada, yada. So I called a buddy of mine that his wife had been on the Brazos River Authority board, and told him what happened. And so our plan of attack the next morning was to get this Bobcat out there, take some plywood, some straps, and get the airplane out of the mud and get it up on this rock jetty. So these series of pictures are getting the Cub out. And this whole time, this is the funny part of this story. So Tom Ford was helping, and Tom is walking across this crust, and he's just walking, no problem. And all of a sudden, swoop, he just sinks up to his knees in this stuff. And it was a mess. But the whole time, the Brazos River Authority was watching us from a boat, but they couldn't get close because they'd get stuck. So they're like, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, they're a government employee. They got to go to lunch, right? So at noon, we're going to fly it out of here, and we're going to tell them we took it apart. Well, we didn't have to do that. about, I don't know, 30 minutes before noon, I get a call from my buddy, and he says, they want that airplane out of there. They're not telling you to fly it. They're not telling you got to take it apart, but they want it out of there, and they don't want you wrecking it doing it. And I was like, okay. And he goes, when are you going to do it? And I said, right now. And he said, really? And I said, yeah, we've been out here since dawn. And so anyway, we drained some fuel out and took it off out of there, and I don't go up to the lake anymore.
Because it was the lake's fault.
Well, no, it wasn't the lake's fault, but there's too many people up there, and you know, everybody, I mean, all the authorities get involved, and where we normally play is, well, we'll get into that story later, but anyway, so we got the airplane out, got everything fixed. It didn't damage anything. We're really, really lucky. But anyway, lesson learned, you know, cracked mud is not a lake bottom is not very good. Now, this next picture, if this comes up on supercub.org a lot, you know, rear spar, ground loop on a Super Cub and rear spars get bent, and you can see the loose fabric here. So I'm in the back seat, and this is the same airplane. I'm in the back seat. We're going to Sun and Fun. This is a save your bush wheel moment. So you pay $3,800 for your bush wheels, and you don't want to land on the asphalt because you might wear some rubber down, right? Okay, so you land on the side of the runway, you run down a hill, a 35-inch bush wheel disappears underneath the airplane, the wing hits the ground, and you have this. So go to the next frame. This is a bent spar. You can see that spar is not straight. That's what it did. So the pilot asked me, so what do we do now? And I said, well, I'm going to inspect it, make sure nothing's cracked. This is the hill that we rolled down. And so he asked me, so I said, well, we're going to inspect it, make sure nothing's cracked. Then you're going to go fly around the patch and see if you want to hold aileron all the way back to Texas. Otherwise, we're going to call Kathy, and she's going to load the truck and the trailer, and she's going to come get us. We're going to have a really, really, really long day. So he flew it around, and he was okay.
Comes up a lot.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's what happens when you're married to me, and she's still married to me. She's a trooper, but so he said he could fly it. So so this is good. This is a 35-inch bush wheel axle nut imprint in the dirt. That's how laid over the wheel was. We found later that the axle was bent. Nothing else. The airplane sat cockeyed, and it bent the axle right outboard of all the tubes where the tubes intersect. But it was funny because we're flying back, and I just keep seeing him look out there at the wingtip. And I go, "Are you want to stop and look at it?" "Yeah, can we?" So we stopped, and we landed in a field and looked it all over, and everything was good. Flew it back to Graham, and then the next morning we jumped in the Clipper and flew to Sun and Fun, and then ended up rebuilding the wing. But so the next one is another save your bush wheel moment. That's a culvert, and the pilot missed the culvert or didn't see the culvert and taxied right into it. You can see the result. So this was another rebuild. This was a second rebuild on this one. But, and the interesting thing on this is the damage that we found in the tail that was not a result of this incident. This was a godsend, really, because the tail was about to break off. We had like 5 cracks back in the tail. This used to be a crop dust. This used to be a sprayer, and there was a lot of severe corrosion. It had been patched, but it was internal, which is unusual in Super Cub. But we ended up getting a repair section, a short repair section from Uniburn, and repairing the fuselage. But this was another, save your bush wheel moment where didn't see the culvert, hit the culvert, and then it had to get a truck and trailer from Wisconsin to Texas. So, but you can go through those pictures, Steve. There's a series of getting it out of the culvert and picking it up. And my father-in-law and daughter came up with the truck and trailer, and we loaded it up, and then it came down here for repairs. So you get a lot of help when something like this happens. But anyway, that's his wife about ready to shoot him. This one's pretty good. I'm not going to say who this is, but this was just last January. We were out Tony and a certain other person and myself were out playing around, and all of a sudden this person comes around the corner. I'm like, holy smokes, go around, go around. And he's got one wing down in the brush, and he touches down and gets her stopped. And we didn't see this until we got to the next gravel bar, but that I can say that Lars is what is that product that all the painted fabric?
I think it's called Oratex.
Oratex. So we got to play with some Oratex. So we got to play with some Oratex and do a patch on that, and got him going, and he got back home in that day. But you know, just some of the trials and tribulations. The one thing that I tell people on a gravel bar, before I take anybody out there, I say, you've got to be able to hit your spot. If you can't hit your spot, you have no business playing on the river or off airport, in my opinion. So I have a lot of people that tell me they can do it. And I've got what I call, well, it's bar number 2. It's about 800 feet long. And the problem with these gravel bars is there's a mental thing. You're down in the river, you're between trees, you're dodging things. And so there's a mental aspect, not only the ability to stop, to land and hit your spot, but also to not get overwhelmed with all the sensory inputs that are going on. And so I take them to this number 2. And if they can't get in on the number 2, then I don't go anywhere else. We'll just fly down the river. I'll show them places and we have fun and it's cool. So anyway, it's hit your spot, and you need a point of there. You've got to have a point. Okay, if I'm not touched down by this point, I'm going to go around, because you don't have 5,000 foot in front of you in case you screw up. And I've seen people go off into the brush, go into little ravines and things because they landed halfway down the landing area. And, you know, picking these things up out of the bottom of the river or wherever, you know, if it's out in Idaho, Utah, whatever, is a monumental task. So this next one is, this video was taken at a car dealership. This guy was landing in a field next to the car dealership, and he'd been in there a couple of weeks before, dropping a guy off to pick his wife's car up, and he didn't realize that they had dug a ditch across the field, and the alfalfa or whatever was in the field was wet, so the airplane's sliding most of the way. This isn't a real good video, but you get the point. And that airplane is about flying now. Should be flying next couple of weeks. But lesson learned there. Check that. Just because it was good 2 weeks ago doesn't mean it's good now. Now this one, we've been out playing, and this is a buddy of mine, and we've been out playing, and we discussed what happens when you flip over, all kinds of stuff. This guy can fly the heck out of this airplane, but when I fly with somebody and I go in somewhere I have never been before, I look at where they land. You can see the tracks. And that way I know, okay, that's a good spot. I know I can touch down there and get stopped. And this particular incident, he went well past where I had touched down, and he got off of a wash with one wheel. And even with 31-inch bush wheels, if you've got one wheel 2 foot below another and you start dragging a wing, it starts wanting to cartwheel. And it flipped over pretty abruptly, and it was a real pain to get in. Now this was the wash. You can see he got one wheel off of that wash, and the other wheel was on top of it. And I was at the end of the gravel bar watching the whole thing happen. It scared me to death. I went running over there, and he panicked and ejected real quick and hit his head on the overhead when he fell. Other than that, he was okay. But this was a 3-day recovery. We got in there that day with a bunch of guys, and then a thunderstorm came in, and it was a mess. And then we got in the next day with this Argo and got it flipped over and then taken apart. And then that was Sunday. Then Monday we got in there, we flew in, and I met the game warden was standing there when I landed. And we had a discussion. This is Lee and a couple of buddies of mine that helped us get it out. But the game warden, I told the game warden, stop right there for a second. So I told the game warden, I said, well, I've been meaning to call you, but you know, it's easier to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. And he laughed and he said, Steve, I've been getting calls on you for this for 20 years. He said, you see how much I care. And I said, you have? I said, why do people call you? And he goes, deer hunters. He said, deer hunters don't like you flying out here. And, but anyway, so he said, you know, because this airplane's sitting out here upside down, I'm going to have to check into this. Well, I had researched our landing on the gravel bars years ago, and I looked up the regulations and the laws, and you can't have a four-wheeler and things like that on the Brazos River, but you can have an airboat. It's not a motor-driven vehicle. The wheels are not driven by a motor. That's the definition. So my argument to him was that an airplane is not motor-driven, or the wheels aren't motor-driven. It's just like an airboat, but it has wings. And he said, well, I'm going to have to check into that. Well, I got to thinking, I'm going to have to start, you know, if he tells me I can't do this, I'm going to have to start telling my buddies that, you know, this is illegal and you can't get a $500 fine. And, you know, some of the guys that I fly with that are professional pilots that fly for a living are probably not going to want to risk their license to do some silly stuff like we do. So anyway, the game warden, he climbs up the hill and we're working on getting the engine off this airplane. And he comes back down. He says, Steve, you're golden. I said, what do you mean, Brent? He said, I just talked to my boss. He read the law. I read the law. And we both agree with you. You're perfectly legal. I was like, cool. Because we go out there and camp out, take the kids, fish, build a campfire, shoot 22s, whatever. I mean, the river's a lot of fun to play on, but there's no access. We just happen to be lucky enough that we have a tool that allows us to access it. And unfortunately, sometimes things like this happen. And so this is a friend of mine, airboat, and he helped us get these. We got the wings and the engine, and you go through these next couple of pictures. I wanted to float this thing out with two boats, but we couldn't get the boats up because the river was too low. Well, the river was going to come up in a couple of days. I checked it upstream and it was already coming up, but he didn't want to do that. So we ended up we pulled the engine out on the boat, and then we pulled the fuselage out on the boat, which was quite an ordeal to get enough manpower to pick that thing up. We put it up there and we got it out, but I didn't take into account the tail wheel when he banked around the corner and the tail wheel digging into the water, and it kind of shifted a little bit, but we ended up all right. But so the next one is a video that I took. I took off in my Cub, and this is not a very good video, but this is just taken from my Cub as my buddy Will Farmer's taking it down the river on his airboat. So go ahead and play that one, Steve.
I'm trying. He's moving a lot faster than I thought he would be.
I wish the video was better, better quality, but anyway, you get the gist of it. That was quite an ordeal because we couldn't, there was a bluff on the side of we couldn't get access with a vehicle. We'd gone in and recovered airplanes or fixed them on the gravel bar, but we go through a lease road or the landowner lets us get on, whatever. But this particular incident, we had to come down through the river. But so this next one, I get it. So these 406 ELTs, when you buy an airplane that has 406 ELT, you need to register that 406 ELT in your name. So Christmas Eve a couple of years ago, Kathy and I and the kids are going to her family's Christmas thing on Christmas Eve, and I get a phone call from Legend Cub. And Darren calls me and says, hey, do you know who owns such and such, such and such? And I said, yeah. I said, he was just flying a little while ago when I left the airport. And he goes, well, I got a call, the ELT's going off. I said, okay, well, I know who it is. I'll give him a shout. So I'm driving down the road. I gave him a call, and I said, hey, what's going on? And he says, oh, not much. And something sounded amiss. I said, hey, did you know your ELT's going off? No, I didn't know that. Okay. Is everything okay? Well, not really. So then he tells me what happens. What happened? We used to land in this field behind his house, and he landed. He tried to take off downwind with somebody in the back, a 100-horse airplane. He wasn't used to that. He ended up going between these two trees, and I couldn't figure out why one wing got destroyed and the other wing not. And I figured out the trees are staggered, and the way he hit them, he hit the left wing first, and then it twisted the airplane. So we did a recovery on this on Christmas Day after all the festivities. We went in there and took this apart. But they both walked away, scared his daughter to death. She came running out there, and he got out of the airplane, and she passed out. She fell out. When he got out of the airplane, she passed out. But I bought this from the salvage, and we were going to rebuild it, and I'm not very good at spending my own time working on my own airplanes other than keeping mine flying. So we just sold this to a young man in Breckenridge, and he's going to rebuild it. So actually two of them partners. But so anyway, the next picture, even the big boys like to go off in the mud. So this was not too long ago. This old boy came into our airport at night, and taxiing out, he didn't stay on the center line, and he got that left main off. And I saw the security camera video, and it abruptly, you can see the tire mark, but he got that right main off in the mud, and we'd had some rain, and that thing was stuck. Took all day to get that airplane out of there. And it's actually the second time there's been an airplane stuck there. This hangar to the left, the pilot whips it out with his tug and gets one wheel off the ramp and into the mud. And then he tried to power it out with the other gear tied to a Suburban, and the strap broke, and then it got more stuck. And it was quite the ordeal. The fire department finally came out with some airbags, and there's a stress panel in there, and they picked it up, put stuff in the hole, and picked it up and put stuff in the hole. And anyway, so, all right, the next one's on me again.
Somebody asked the question, by the way, Steve.
What's that?
I won't say who it was. They asked if you had the most flip-flop hats.
Well, I told Steve a long time ago that we need kill pins. But then the problem is, if you wear that with a pin, then that digs into your head when you hit your head.
Right.
So
well, maybe it'll serve as a reminder if you had about 5 or 6 of those poking into your head.
Well, you know, and on a serious note on that, I've done some stupid stuff, I will admit. And you know, and you have to understand that when you get off of a 5,000-foot runway, the risk goes up. And you know, after about my second incident, my mom thought I was absolutely batshit crazy. But my dad understands it. My dad was in the Navy. His adrenaline was sitting on the carrier deck 12 hours a day watching them shoot and recover airplanes. And he understands that adrenaline and that thrill. But I have learned a lot of stuff. I do things totally different. When I got my Super Cub, 5 years ago, Mark Englers called me up. And he said, Steve, you and Tom need to have a safety meeting every day before you go fly. And I said, Mark, you're absolutely right. I said, when I head west out of here and I go across Lake Graham, I tell myself I am flying this airplane back to this airport today. And there's been times when my brother and Tom were landing on the Big Skid or some of the more challenging places, and I'd have a passenger, I'd have a customer or somebody with me, and I'd go, I can get in there. And I think to myself, no, I don't need to prove anything. It's, you know, I don't know. I fly all the time, and I have a good feel of my airplane. And there's certain places I go in certain conditions, and there's certain places I don't go in certain conditions. And I mean, I could tear something up tomorrow, but I feel like I'm more careful, and I have learned a lot of hard lessons, and I don't feel like I'm reckless in that regard. But anyway, you know, I don't know. It's part of what we do. But that's the whole point in this whole thing to me, is so that you know that these flying cowboys, and not to just to bring them out, but any of these people that post videos on YouTube, there's a lot of carnage that doesn't get posted. And that's my point here is stuff happens. This was just an idiot. I hadn't flown in 2 weeks, and I can tell you, I fly at least once a week. And I can't remember, we had to go out of town or something, and I went out and I missed my spot. I was going over a pile of brush. I touched down on some sticks, and I didn't even know this happened. I rolled up and met Tony and another guy on the gravel bar, and we went down and hit about 3 more gravel bars, and I got back to the airport, and I found this when I went to push my airplane in the hangar. And I sent the picture to Tony, and you have to know Tony's wife, Chris, because she's a mess. And so this lives in infamy. I don't know if you can see this, but this is my mouse pad. Chris had this made for me. This is a picture of the stick through my elevator, and it's now my mouse pad that Chris Terrell gave me. So I can always remember this little incident. But Tony went back. He had his GoPro going when I landed, and he went back and he could slow it down and see when I hit the sticks. When I taxied back by him, the stick was hanging out of my elevator. Just none of us saw it. And I was getting the dogs in the back seat, and I didn't see it. I got the dogs in, and I got in, and we went to a couple more gravel bars because I take my dogs pretty much everywhere. They love the river. But so anyway, that was another one of those. And then there's another dum-dum. So my buddy Will Farmer that's got the airboat, he loves to go flying in Super Cub. He's a pretty good sized guy. So I get him I put the fuel can up there and dumping fuel in, and I help him get in the back seat. And I get him all buckled in and have my head unscrewed, and I jump in the front seat and we take off. It's windier than all get out. And we go down the river. We don't land anywhere, and we're just flying around, come back to the airport, park, walk back to the back, push it in the hangar, and I look up, and Daryl Morgan comes over, buddy of mine. He goes, hey, hey, hey. And I see the gas can. That gas can rode around for about 45 minutes on my wing like that with a rubber hose stuck in the filler neck. I couldn't tell anything, but anyway. So this next picture, a lot of people water ski, and that's all well and good and fun and all that. But this buddy of mine, he was asking about how to water ski, and, we kind of told him how we do it and speeds and feel and all that. And he came by the other day, and he sent me this picture to use in this. And he said, people can tell you all day long how to do that, but when you really get down there and do it yourself, it's totally different. And he got a little bit, I think he hit the water. This scared me to death because I was a witness to this. And I saw him hit the water and start sinking. And I just screamed, power, power, power. And I spun around. I didn't want to see it. And I spun around real quick. And then I heard him climb out. And it scared him. He shoved the power in and climbed out of it. But, it's another one of those things that every now and then I'll do this to get up on a gravel bar or something, but I'm not a big fan of just water skiing down the river. I know people that they do it all the time and are really good at it, but again, it's a risk involved, and if you're willing to accept the consequences, then go for it. So this next one is a hold my beer moment. This is two big dogs trying to prove who's the best, who can land the shortest, side by side in the howling wind over a bunch of stumps on a sandbar. And anyway, I'll let the video speak for itself. Oh, you went too far.
Well,
there you go. That's a shot of the video, and the guy in the Cub was upset because the videographer dropped the phone and went running to help him, instead of getting the aftermath of the whole incident. But luckily, in the next, I think the next frame is how it ended up, and it bent the prop, and they called me, and then all I had for a Continental was an air coupe prop, so I took an air coupe prop out there and we stuck it on. It took him a little bit longer to get off the ground with that little short prop, but he got out of there. But it never a dull moment. Now this is funny. This is funny, and it's not. The thing that you got to think about is you can get in somewhere, but can you get out? And you have to think about that. And I heard Paul Claus speak at the Airman Show years ago, and he had a rule that I agree with 100%. If he tries to get into a place, if he can't get in there after 3 attempts, then he leaves because he tries to talk himself into it. And I thought that was a pretty good rule. I've got another rule. I don't land on the first pass. If I'm looking at a place, and I did this one time, I flew over a spot and I thought, man, I can land there. I'm going to check it out. And I turned around and I went over it, and everything felt right. And I touched down, and then I realized there was a big old ridge and I was going to hit it and it was going to tear up some stuff. And I couldn't, it wasn't a situation where I could add power and get out. And I jammed on the brake, and I ended up jamming on the left brake and doing an abrupt 90-degree turn. And I ended up with my prop hanging over the river, and scared me to death. And so my rule now is I go over the gravel bar at least 2 different directions, because the shadows of the light show divots and rises and stuff like that better than just one direction. So in this case, this is Tom and my brother lands. This is a tank dam that they just built, and he'd been wanting to land there, and the wind was howling, and it was from the direction of the water. Well, he landed going up the tank dam. Well, he gets to the middle of the tank dam and he doesn't know where to go, because he can't turn around and go down because he'll hit the trees. So he stopped in the middle of the tank dam, and he calls Tom on the radio, and he goes, "How do I get out of here?" And Tom's like, "I don't know. I guess you just stop, and we'll call Steve, and he'll bring a truck and the trailer out here, and we'll take it apart." And my brother's like, "We can't do that. He'll be pissed at me." And Tom's like, "Well, you should have thought about that." You need that Boston accent with Tom, because, to get the full effect. But Tom's like, "Well, you should have thought about that before you did that." And so Tom let him go for a little bit, and then he finally told him, he said, "Taxi to the top of the tank dam, and you can go off to the right, and there's a plowed place that you can take off and get out of there." But Tom took this picture to teach him a lesson. So anyway, that's the story and the lesson.
For our friends not from Texas, a tank is what we would normally call a pond.
It's a man-made pond. So in Texas, you don't have much water, so you get in a draw and you plow up a bunch of dirt, and they call it a tank, so that you got water for your cattle or whatever. But yeah, I've become a Texan. I've been here too long. I've been here longer than I've been anywhere now. So anyway, well, the next one, so I'm without an airplane, and my wife's got a tri-pacer, and I'm out with Tal, and Tal's flying his 90-horse Super Cub, and I'm in the tri-pacer, and I come around the corner, and I go, "Man, I can land in there." And I did. It was getting out that was the problem. As you can see, the nose gear is sunk in the gravel, and every attempt I made to get out of there I couldn't get any speed. So there was a brush pile that had washed up on this gravel bar, and there happened to be a section of picket fence in that brush pile. And I was able to take the boards off the picket fence and lay them in a straight line as a ramp for the nose wheel, and I was able to get it out of there. I had to call Kathy and tell her, and she knew as soon as I called her, she knew that I had got her airplane stuck on a gravel bar. She knew. She told me that. She said, "I knew exactly where you're going when you took off my airplane." But I don't do that anymore. Anyway. So the next one is, so we go out every Sunday morning, we go out flying. Well, this is a buddy of ours, and he was already out. Well, we take off, and we're going to the river, and Eddie calls us, "Hey, come over to Rosser. I got a problem. I got a flat tire." So we go over there, and he landed in the field and abruptly came to a stop because he had a flat tire. Go to the next. So go to the next one, Steve.
Oh, sorry.
One more. There you go. Somebody put slime in the tire. So there's green everywhere. So Tom goes back to the airport, gets tire and tube, air tank, whole deal. And so we have a tire changing party out there on this little grass strip. And by the time we got done, it looked like we had slain a Martian, because there was green slime all over the ground, all over us, all over everything. It was quite the ordeal. But we got him back in there and back home. Go back, keep going, and then you can see the tire and the tube. I don't know who, I've never seen anybody put slime in an aviation tire. And this is a typical deal too. You got the supervisor, and then you got the two worker bees. And the next set of pictures is kind of similar. I talked to Eddie before this. And I told him he wasn't in this thing, but he really is. So he just got a new EX2 Carbon Cub. He just got back from Idaho with, or Washington. So go to the next frame, and this is when another story of you need the proper equipment. So we all camp out on the gravel bars. You notice that pacer in there with those little bitty tires? Well, he showed up from Abilene, and he wanted to go camping with us. And I said, why don't you land at Rosser's, and we'll come in there and pick you up and all your camping gear, and we'll take you into this gravel bar. Well, my brother convinced him that he could get in here, and he did. He got in there, and he camped. And this was the next morning. We camped out, had a good time, big bonfire, had the dogs. So I go to the next picture. Well, you see the tail wheel's buried. And then the next picture, you can see the ruts that he couldn't get any speed because he kept sinking into this crust. You break through the crust and get into the soft stuff, and he couldn't pick up any speed. Go to the next picture, and you can see this is the rut. These are the ruts that he was leaving. So again, Tom Ford to the rescue. He went back to the hangar, got some 26s that were mounted up, brought them in a jack, and then the next frames you can see Eddie supervising again. Tom and Wes are jacking the pacer up, putting the bigger tires on, and the next frame is ready to go, and he got out of there no problem. Next time I saw Wes, he had a set of 31s on this airplane. And now it's at Noah's Ark, isn't it, Steve?
Yep, that plane's right down here. I saw it flying just the other day.
Yep. So then we come to the next picture. Now, you know, a lot of people got to have bush wheels. You know, there's 35-inch bush wheels, and there's some air streaks on a Rams. And then you got Joe over here, who's, what is Joe, like 76, 77 years old, in his old 79 model Super Cub that he's had forever on his 850s. And pretty much stock airplanes. So he's out there playing with the big boys, and he's just showing them how to do it. And the next two pictures are him taking off out of the same place where Kevin and them need to have big tires. But this is up in Palo Duro Canyon. It's real pretty flying. So this was a couple Sundays ago. I had just left the airport, got a call, hey, you need to come back, we got a problem. And this guy from Kansas City ground looped his FX3. We've had 8 ground loops in the same spot. There's trees, the wind comes out of the northwest, rolls up the hill, and it's kind of blocked by the trees. And then when you get out of that blocked area, this is where the carnage happens. We're going to put a windsock out there, but this was a brand new FX3. I felt bad for him. Got to put a J3, broke the left shock strut completely off, and I had that's the shock strut, AOSS, and I had a J3 shock strut. Put it on there, it's kind of cockeyed because this is extended, but we were able to pick up the wing, put the shock strut on, and I just got a wing and gear and everything from Cub Crafters. The next picture is the wing. It's bent pretty good. So they built me another wing, aileron, flap, landing gear, painted it, covered it, painted it, and everything. Just got it in a big old crate last week and got it on the airplane, getting all rigged out. So And you know, these are incidents or accidents where nobody got hurt. And this incident right here, so I annualed this airplane in February, and this was a very nice new restoration, a couple of years old. And he climbed out of a strip, lost aileron control, bounced off the top of a hangar, and ended up on this barbed wire fence. And both of them walked away without an injury. And they were very, 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 very lucky, which is a testament to shoulder harnesses, X braces, and new fuselages. Or you know, the stuff on the you know, the safety mods. Now we get into seriousness of everything. A lot of the old timers know this accident. This was a tailwheel pilot in the back seat, a non-tailwheel pilot in the front seat, and it got away from them. And Steve can tell this story because he knows the story better than me.
Well, I don't, you know, I wasn't there, but this was on John Brewer's strip down in southeast Missouri, and that's Paul Fisher, who is a good friend of many of us, and he was riding in the back seat and was kind of helping this guy get comfortable with tailwheel, but was not an instructor himself. And when they, when I went and walked the path of the accident, and you could see exactly what happened because of the way the prevailing wind was coming from on that airstrip. There's a classic, you know, the tail dragger turns into the wind, and weather vanes into the wind, and they both died, obviously. And you know, it was a really sad day. It was a great member of supercub.org, did a lot. The pavilion in New Holstein is named after him, not because of this, but as much as of all that he gave to build that. So, you know, it's sad when this happens, but you know, there's this fine line between having some fun and everything going okay, and then something going really wrong. You know, the Super Cub is a tremendously forgiving airplane, and if the pictures Steve has shown are not a testament to that, I don't think there's a better one, because you know, we obviously a lot of things have happened and everybody's okay, but it doesn't always work out that way. So it's not good when it doesn't.
So the point, and this is the end of my. This is Lee when he was a little baby, and a friend of mine's 90 horse Cub. This is the airplane that I got started in Super Cubs with. So I learned. I was working in a warbird shop in Breckenridge, Texas, and wanted to learn how to fly. And my boss had a Clipper, had flown a Clipper a lot. And he told his oldest son and I that that's what we needed to get. And we got to fly one time. We bought a PA-16 Clipper, which got me into the Rag and Tube Pipers. And then I met the gentleman that owned this airplane, and I got to fly this airplane a lot, did a lot of work on it, and just fell in love with Super Cub. And this was one of Lee's first flights when he was a baby. And but when I first started working on this airplane, I didn't know that much about Super Cubs. I knew about the Clipper and the Tri-Pacer and the Pacer, because I'd done some work on those. So I called Atlee Dodge, and I said, I understand you have a lot of mods and stuff for Super Cubs. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, what have you got? And he said, well, what do you want? And I said, well, I don't know. What kind of stuff do you got? We went back and forth like that. He ended up sending me a stack of drawings like this. I've still got them over here in my cabinet. And, you know, I went through them, and then I remember I went to Piper School I moved over here and started an FBO, and I was just doing general aviation. And I went to Piper School. I had a brand new Malibu and a brand new Saratoga, so I went down to Austin. I went to Piper School, and while I was down there, I bought my first computer, and I came back and I set it all up, and I got a modem, and you know. Not too long after, I kept searching Super Cub, and what I would get were those little Honda motorcycles. And finally, one day, I find supercub.org, and I'm like, holy cow, this is cool. And man, I was just like a sponge. I lived in my hangar. Kathy and I were dating, but I lived in my hangar. I'd get my bowl of cereal, and I'd come in here to the computer, and I'd read supercub.org and eat my cereal, and just read everything that people had to say. And then if I knew something about, because the Pipers are all, most of J3 all the way up through the Pawnee are a lot of they're all the same, really, the construction and everything. So if I knew the answer to a question, I'd answer to the best of my ability. And through that participation, then people in the surrounding area started bringing me their Super Cubs to work on and do annuals on. And then, so I learned more and more and more and more. And, and then in 2002, I was in the mid-air collision at Sun and Fun, and I had a lot of time. I had 10 days in the hospital to think about things and think about because my initial goal was to rebuild warbirds. But I realized how different that owners were. And anyway, so when I was laying in the hospital, I told myself I'm going to get out of this general aviation, because that's all I did. I was like 10, 12 hours a day. I was getting burned out. You do an annual and it goes out the door, and you get another one. And this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to rebuild tube and fabric airplanes. And I came back and I fired myself. And I attribute my whole everything to this website and this airplane, because I've met more people, I've learned more stuff, I've had more opportunities because of participation on this website and playing with these silly airplanes. Been to Alaska more times than I can count, and so, but I see these, accidents, airplanes getting damaged, people getting hurt, things like that. But you go to YouTube and all that, and you see all the glory, and it's all cool and it's all well and good until somebody tears up something. And so that was my goal with this, was to show the serious side of this, that there are consequences to what we do, and to think about, and maybe I hope through what I presented here, that somebody doesn't have to go through what I've gone through or some of my friends have gone through to learn that lesson. And the other thing is, I've known people that they'll blame anything and everything on, besides themselves. And the problem that I see there is, if you don't admit to what you did or didn't do, you're going to repeat that. And I was on a gravel bar not long ago, and this guy just landed his maul out there. His first time he'd ever landed off airport. This guy, we got to telling stories, and he was hyped up like anything. And we were kind of telling some of these stories, and he said, "Steve, the thing I liked about you is you just tell it like it is." He said, "You do something stupid, you wear it." And it kind of struck me, I hadn't really thought about it, but what else am I going to do? I can't make any excuses. I did it, and.
Well, there's also too many witnesses. So speaking of that, there's a young lady in the wings who might have a thing or two to say. She's been unmuted.
Well, I was going to ask about the tri-pacer incident, but then you covered it. And I've been watching all of y'all's chats about how I'm a saint and, all this other stuff. And I may be taking applications for an apprentice if anybody is interested to be the next caller. No, he has calmed down quite a bit, and it's been, what has it been, Steve? Probably 9-10 years since you've called me?
It's been a while.
Yeah.
Well, I've had the Super Cup for 6 years now, and I was without for 3 or 4.
If you don't have an airplane, that makes it easier not to wreck one.
That's for sure.
I also attribute it to he's getting older and things hurt worse. So that might have something to do with it too.
And that's a very good point, because the older you get, all those injuries that you got at a younger age come back to haunt you, and I can attest to that.
I can too. I hear him every morning. So.
Hey, anybody else got any other questions? Some folks asked some questions about Paul's crash and about what caused the wing to ignite. I think we sort of covered that with probably the electrical. And interesting, I was going to ask you this too, Steve. So if we all sort of, any of us saw the Todd Simmons crash when he would try to do the go around at Dewey Moore a couple of years ago. One of the things that I heard in an explanation of that was that somebody was reaching in post crash to switch off the master, and Jim Richmond stopped them and said, "Don't touch anything." That actually turning off the master switch could cause a spark in the master relay, and could be a problem. So if you're in that situation, if you've gotten in a situation where you've crashed with the master on, leave it on. Don't tempt fate, because most of these fires, if I understand this correctly, most of the fires in any kinds of aviation accidents come from a spark and gas.
Yep. Well, Jerry Gaston told me a story when Jerry Gaston climbed out of I guess he got above the trees, and right as he got above the trees, he got a gust of wind or something, and he came back down, straight down, and hit the ground. And he said all of a sudden, it was just whoomph at his feet, and he went, and anybody knows Jerry, he's a big old guy. He went between the V in the front structure and out the windshield. And Tal and I saw the airplane at Hartman's place when we went to Alaska back about 9 years ago. And that's the only thing I could think that fuel leaked out and something sparked, because I remember him telling me it just went poof, and he was out of there. And that's one of the scary things to me is fire.
Hey, a guy from Montana, an air traffic controller from Montana, asks if they make safety cables for front spar fittings.
For front spar fittings?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly why he's asking that question. Alan, can I unmute you and have you ask the question?
No, Alan, he's being a smart aleck.
All right, Alan, you're unmuted. You got to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just see all them wings folding back. I thought maybe they need an STC for front spar safety cables so the wings don't fold back when you guys hit your trees and hit your wingtips and all that stuff.
Notice he says you guys.
Yeah.
Actually, the only time Case Modell's ever wrecked an airplane that I know of was mine. I know, it was just bad parking, Alan, I know.
Yep, I know. Maybe we should have had some pictures of that.
We should have, yeah. Actually, this could be actually a very long, it could be a very long series, could go on for hours. So, but anybody got anything else? Anybody got any other closing remarks? Steve, this was fantastic. We could keep going on. Oh, there's your dogs running around in Kathy's video. We could keep going on here for another hour, I'm sure, but I appreciate you taking the time and putting this together. I appreciate your willingness to share the things that have happened to you, because if we don't do that, folks, if you don't share these experiences, the negative experiences with some of these younger pilots and these up and coming folks, then they're just going to have to go learn it the hard way. And like Steve said, we really, the idea is to help people, to help people not have to make all of these same mistakes. So, and I do appreciate that you're tempering all of the stuff you see on YouTube. Because a lot of it, there are some things that happen, and we know about a lot of it. So, thank you again, Mr. Pierce. And I think we'll be working on another presentation with you here in the near future. I think some good things. I know folks would probably like to hear about your Sun and Fun experience, and that could use a whole episode. So it is another sobering but important lesson there. So thank you. Thanks for saying hi, Kathy, and you are a saint. And we'll see everybody later. Thanks for being here, folks.
All right, thanks, Steve.